Hello, my name is Emma. I'm 76 years old. And if you asked anyone about me 10 years ago, they would have called me the quiet one, the helper, the woman who made things easier for everyone around her. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I didn't take up space. I spent most of my life in Asheville, North Carolina, a cozy town tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains where the leaves turn gold in October and time seems to stretch a little slower. I worked for 37 years as a maternity nurse at Baptist Memorial. I brought lives into the world, held the hands of scared mothers, cleaned floors when no one else would. That's who I was, the one people leaned on but rarely looked back at. I lost my husband, Charles, when I was just 53. It was sudden, a heart attack on a warm spring morning while he was trimming the hedges. One moment, I was bringing him a glass of lemonade. The next, I was kneeling on the lawn, screaming his name. After that, it was just me and Michael, our son. He was my entire world. I raised Michael on a single income. In a 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, I skipped vacations, holidays, and even meals sometimes, just to make sure he had everything he needed. He was a kind boy, brilliant. 2, went to college, studied architecture, came back home, and met Jessica. Jessica was sweet when we first met, soft-spoken, artistic, the kind of woman who called me Mama Emma with a smile that made me believe she meant it. When she and Michael got married, I cried at the ceremony, not just because I was proud, but because I truly thought, he's not alone anymore. Someone will share the load now. When they bought their first house, I handed over my entire retirement savings without hesitation. Every penny. Michael had said, "Mom, I want a home where we can build our future," and that's all I needed to hear. I wanted him to have everything he deserved. I didn't care about ownership. I only cared about his happiness. But no one ever teaches you what to do when the very thing you built starts to erase you. When the people you love most begin to forget where they came from. At the time, I didn't know I was laying the foundation for a house. I would one day be asked to leave, but I would learn, and the world would hear my voice sooner than anyone expected. Michael passed away on a rainy Tuesday in March. He was 39. That's the age people say you still have time. But time didn't listen. Cancer doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for you to finish your plans. 1 month he had a cough. The next, he was fading before our eyes. Jessica and I took turns sitting by his bed in the living room, trying to hold back the fear, the questions, the helplessness. And then one day, he was gone. The house fell silent in a way I wasn't used to. Not just quiet, but empty. A hollow kind of silence that stretched through the walls and wrapped around your ribs until you forgot how to breathe. I was ready to go. I started packing my things the week after the funeral, not wanting to linger where memories still clung to coffee mugs and folded blankets. But Jessica stopped me. "Please, Mama, Emma," she said, "don't leave me in this house alone. I can't do this without you." So I stayed. At first, we clung to each other. We cried over burnt toast and watched home videos of Michael, like they were church sermons. Jessica would reach for my hand during quiet moments and whisper, "I'm so glad you're here." I meant to stay a few months, just long enough to help her stand again. But months became a year. Then, too, I cooked meals. I cleaned. I kept the garden alive because Michael had planted the rose bushes himself. I never asked for rent, space, or thanks. Just being needed was enough. Jessica returned to teaching part-time. She started doing yoga again. Made smoothies that smelled like grass and bananas. Little by little, the sadness in her eyes started to fade. And that made me happy. Truly. But something else started changing too. Subtle things. The photos of Michael began disappearing from the shelves. The living room furniture was rearranged without a word. The chair Michael gave me, my favorite blue reading chair, was moved to the garage. We're going for a more open look, Jessica explained when I asked. I told myself it was just part of healing, that people grieve differently, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But deep down, a voice I hadn't heard in years began whispering, something is shifting. I ignored it, because sometimes love teaches you to overlook the cracks in the wall until the whole house starts falling down. And I still believed we were holding it together, even as it slowly, quietly, began to come apart. It didn't happen all at once. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found my favorite mug, an old ceramic one with a little sunflower painted on it, missing from the cabinet. In its place were rows of minimalist white cups, all identical. When I asked Jessica, she smiled and said, "Oh, I'm just updating the kitchen." The old mugs didn't match the new aesthetic. The new aesthetic, that's when I noticed the rug in the hallway was gone. The one Michael and I picked out at a flea market in Boone years ago. Then it was the curtains in the den, the framed photo of Michael in his college cap and gown. Bit by bit, the house began to look less like a memory and more like a catalog, and not one I recognized. Then came Tyler. Jessica introduced him as a friend from her yoga class. But his sneakers were always by the door, and there was a second toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom. At first, I thought it was none of my business. People move on. I get that. But the way she introduced him to guests, casual, confident, made my stomach twist. One evening, you overheard Jessica say, "Tyler's going to start working from home. I'm thinking of converting the guest room into an office." The guest room, that was my room. I asked her about it, gently, and she said, "Well, maybe it's time to think about other living options. You know places better suited for you." I stared at her. Better suited. She pulled up a website for a senior living community. They have a garden. Emma, you'd love it. And people your age to connect with. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I knew, deep down, the decision had already been made. Later that night, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in an old flannel blanket. The porch light buzzed overhead. From inside, I heard laughter. Jessica's, Tyler's, someone else's, people I didn't know, voices that didn't ask if I wanted anything, didn't notice I wasn't there. I used to think silence was peace, but this silence felt like erasure. I had been the one who watered the plants, who cooked the meals, who made this house a home again after Michael died. And now, I was being gently pushed aside, smiled at, nodded to, but slowly and surely removed. And I realized something that chilled me more than the mountain air. I wasn't part of the plan anymore. I was just in the way. It was a Thursday evening. I remember because I had just finished making a pot of chicken soup, Jessica's favorite, or at least it used to be. I wrapped up a small container to leave by the door, a quiet offering, in hopes of reconnecting. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a group message, addressed to several people I didn't know. Just one sentence, 10 words long. "Hey everyone, No drop-ins tonight. Trying to keep it light. No hi. Emma. No mention of Michael. No warmth. Just boundaries. Delivered like a weather update. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to reply, or delete it, or pretend I hadn't seen it. My soup sat untouched on the table. I wasn't hungry anymore. I was hollow. This wasn't about space. This wasn't about grief. This was something else, something colder. A line drawn, not in sand, but in cement. A way of saying, please don't come. You're no longer welcome here. I glanced at the scarf I had placed on the table earlier that day. Navy blue. Soft wool. I had picked it out 2 weeks ago. Wrapped it in gold ribbon. It was meant to be a gift for Jessica. A gesture for the anniversary of Michael's passing. A silent way to say, I remember, and I'm still here. But I never got the chance. Instead, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the scarf like it was some foolish token from a forgotten holiday. I thought of every time I had made myself smaller for her comfort, every time I had bit my tongue, stepped aside, nodded when something hurt. Not out of weakness, but out of love. And now, that love felt like a coat I'd worn too long. Threadbare. Heavy. No longer warming. The worst part wasn't the message. It was everything that had come before it. The way she moved my things without asking. The look in her eyes when she spoke to me like she was bored. Like I was furniture. And still, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't stood up. I told myself it was just the grief. That it would pass. That if I stayed quiet, I'd be welcomed again. But deep down, I knew the truth. She didn't forget me. She just didn't want me. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself feel that pain fully. And without apology, that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the scarf still folded neatly beside me. The phone screen dark on my nightstand. Its silence, somehow louder than any alarm. The hum of the refrigerator. The ticking of the wall clock. Everything around me seemed to echo with the same message. You don't belong anymore. I got up, not out of energy, but instinct. My feet carried me to the hallway closet, where I kept a battered old file box, one of those accordion-style organizers. Yellowed with age, my knees popped as I crouched down. But I didn't stop. I was looking for something I hadn't thought about in years. And then I found it, tucked between tax forms and hospital bills. Was a manila envelope labeled in Michael's handwriting, House Deed Mom's Copy. My heart caught in my throat. I sat at the kitchen table and slid the papers out, hands trembling. There, it was black ink on white paper, Emma Louise Hart. My name, clear as day, listed as co-owner. It hit me like a gust of wind. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a visitor. I wasn't someone who had overstayed her welcome. This house, the one where Jessica was now pouring wine for strangers and blasting music in Michael's kitchen, was as much mine as it ever was hers. And I had forgotten that I had let myself be slowly erased. I had allowed my silence to become consent. My kindness mistaken for surrender. I had traded my presence for peace, and it cost me everything. But holding that paper, something in me stirred. No renga, not revenge. Something older, something stronger. Truth. I wasn't just Michael's mother. I wasn't just the woman who folded laundry and stayed quiet. I was a woman who had built a life, paid bills, signed documents, held people together when everything else fell apart. I was Emma Louise Hart, And that piece of paper wasn't just legal proof, it was spiritual proof that I still mattered, that I had a right to exist in the world I helped create, that I wasn't invisible, and never had been. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call Jessica. I just sat there, with the deed in my hands, breathing in silence that no longer felt like loss, but like space. Space I intended to reclaim, because this wasn't the end, not even close. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The world was still dark. Asheville still quiet. The fog resting like a blanket over the hills. I brewed a wee cup of grocery store tea, not because I liked the taste, but because I needed something warm to hold. The steam curled beneath my chin as I sat at the kitchen table. The house deed laid out before me like a forgotten map. I traced the letters of my name with my finger. Emma. Louise. Hart. The woman who raised a son on a nurse's salary. The woman who stayed when she was asked. The woman who kept saying yes, even when everything in her spirit was whispering no. That woman was still here. She was just tired of waiting to be invited back into her own story. I opened a fresh notebook and made a list. Not of groceries, not of chores, but of names and numbers. Kendra Williams. The estate attorney who helped handle Michael's will, Buncombe County Clerk's office. Where the property records were kept, Sheriff Dale McMillan. An old acquaintance from church, now semi-retired but still on call for legal enforcement. Ach Name steadied me. Each checkmark gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. That afternoon, I called Kendra. Her voice was calm and warm. The kind of voice that doesn't rush you. I just need to know if I still have legal rights to the home. I asked. She looked it up. Emma, she said after a pause. Your name is still on the deed. You're a legal co-owner. I nodded. Not surprised, but validated. From there, the rest unfolded like dominoes. I filed a petition to enforce ownership rights. I requested a certified letter be prepared. I scheduled an appointment with the sheriff's office to discuss a peaceful intervention. If needed, I didn't tell anyone. Not even the ladies at church. This wasn't about making noise. It was about restoring silence, the kind that doesn't come from erasure, but from peace. That evening, I pulled my coat from the closet and slipped the deed into my purse. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. Same soft lines around my eyes. Same silver hair. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I didn't see someone waiting to be included. I saw someone ready. And the house that once pushed me out, it was going to see me walk through its doors again on my own terms. The morning I went back, the sky was the color of steel, heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but never quite followed through. I wore my nicest coat, the navy wool one I used to save for church. I pinned back my hair, applied a little lipstick, and tucked the house deed carefully into my purse. Then I stepped onto the city bus. Each stop creaked, like time itself hesitating. But I didn't. I sat upright, steady, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The bus rolled past the streets I used to walk with Michael. The coffee shop where he'd bring me muffins on Mother's Day. The corner bookstore he always said he'd take his kids to someday. All of it passed like pages in a closed chapter. But the story wasn't finished. When I arrived at the house, there were cars in the driveway. Laughter trickled out from the open windows. Glasses clinking. Someone's music spilling across the front lawn. Another party. Another night I hadn't been invited to. I walked up the path slowly. Sheriff Dale beside me in uniform, holding the official documents like a shield of truth. Jessica opened the door. Mid-laugh. Her smile flickered when she saw Dale. Then it disappeared entirely when her eyes landed on me. "Emma," she said, blinking. "What's going on?" The sheriff cleared his throat. Polite, but firm. "Miss, Hart is a legal co-owner of this property. She has filed for enforcement of her rights. You are not a tenant. You are an unauthorized occupant." Jessica's mouth dropped open. For a second, I saw the girl who used to call me Mama Emma, who used to cry on my shoulder, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "You can't be serious," she muttered. "This is my home." I stepped forward, calm and steady. "This house was mine before it was ever yours. You forgot that, but the law didn't." Behind her, I could see Tyler in the hallway, confused. Jessica's parents appeared in the background, their faces hardening as soon as they saw me. No one said hello. No one asked if I was okay. The sheriff handed Jessica the notice. "You have 24 hours to vacate," he said. "We'll return to ensure compliance." Jessica stared at me, a mix of shock and fury in her eyes. "You can't do this to me." But I already had. I turned and walked back down the steps. Behind me, her voice cracked into the night. "You don't scare me." Emma, I didn't answer, because I wasn't there to scare anyone. I was there to take back what was mine. The next day, the house was still. The party was over. Folding chairs were scattered across the lawn. Forgotten red plastic cups nestled in the grass. The smell of wine and perfume lingered in the air like ghosts reluctant to leave. I stood at the edge of the driveway and took a deep breath. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. I opened the front door slowly, half expecting Jessica to be waiting behind it with another sharp word, or one last attempt to make me feel small. But the house met me with silence, not cold, not empty, just still. I stepped inside. The hallway was cluttered with the remnants of someone else's life. A yogamat, an incense burner, a stack of glossy magazines on manifesting abundance, but beneath it all, the bones of the home I helped build were still there. I moved through each room like I was reclaiming sacred ground. In the living room, I opened the curtains wide and let the mountain sunlight pour in. I cracked the windows, let the air move through, sweeping out the weight of the months I'd spent holding my breath. In Michael's old room, I sat at the edge of his bed. The window frame was still worn where the sun had bleached it over time. I ran my fingers along it and remembered the night he moved in. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, his eyes glowing with excitement. He said, "Mom, it finally feels like home." I let that memory sit with me, not as an ache, but as an anchor. Then I did something simple, something ordinary and extraordinary at once. I took down a generic framed print from the hallway and replaced it with a photo of Michael as a boy, standing in the snow, his cheeks pink and his grin wide. I placed another photo on the mantel, the three of us on the porch. Before the cancer, before the cracks, before the forgetting. Later that afternoon, I went to the mailbox. Tucked between grocery ads and utility bills was a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single note. "I was at the party the night you came back. I saw the way they treated you, and I saw how you stood there calm, proud, steady. I just wanted to say thank you. You reminded me what dignity looks like." There was no signature, just that message. But it echoed louder than anything I'd heard in years. It started with a simple flyer on a corkboard at the community center Saturday tea at Emma's no fee. No fuss, just stories. I didn't expect anyone to come. I didn't even bake cookies that first time, just set out a few chairs, a pot of Earl Grey, and a tin of crackers I'd bought on sale. Only one woman showed up. Her name was Dolores. She wore a lavender cardigan and carried a Tupperware container of lemon cookies she had made herself. She had just lost her sister. Her hands trembled slightly when she poured her tea, and when I asked how she was doing, she said, "I feel like the world moved on without me." I nodded. I knew exactly what that felt like. The next week, there were 3 of us, then 5, then 10, and somehow, over warm drinks and mismatched mugs, the living room filled not with furniture, but with voices, not gossip, not complaint. Just people, real people, who had once been told they were too much or not enough. There was Janice, whose son had moved her across the country and never called. There was Harold, who had lost his wife 2 winters ago and still set 2 places at the table out of habit. There was even a young woman named Rachel, in her 30s, who had left a controlling marriage and just needed a quiet place to sit. No one asked about the past unless someone was ready to share it, and when they did, the room didn't gasp or judge. They just listened. One afternoon, Dolores looked at me from across the table and said, "You seem different now, like someone who stopped hiding." I smiled. I did. And I had, piece by piece. My story came out, not as a speech, not as a dramatic confession, but in moments, a sentence here, a memory there. Sometimes my voice shook. Sometimes it didn't. But every time I spoke, I felt a little more grounded, a little more here. The group began calling itself The Table. No fancy titles. No agenda. Just the belief that everyone deserves a seat somewhere they belong. We started writing cards to seniors in care homes, donating time at the local pantry, helping each other fix leaky faucets and plant spring bulbs. We were no longer waiting to be remembered. We were remembering each other. And the strangest part, I wasn't angry anymore. The resentment, the quiet ache of being cast aside had softened, not because I'd forgotten, but because I was no longer living in the shadows of what I lost. I was finally living in the light of what I still had. The letter came on a Tuesday morning. It was thin, folded neatly, tucked inside a pale blue envelope addressed in Jessica's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in months, but I recognized it, instantly curved. Neat. Almost hesitant. Like she was always afraid of pressing too hard. I stood at the kitchen counter for a long time before opening it. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. She didn't say she was sorry for the way things ended. She didn't mention the chair she threw out, or the parties, or the message that finally pushed me out. But she wrote, "I understand now why you did what you did." Tyler left. My parents stopped talking to me after the sheriff came. I've been trying to put things back together. I don't know if you'd ever want to hear from me again, but I hope you found peace. Jessica. I read it twice. Then I folded it gently and placed it in the back of my desk drawer. Not out of bitterness, not to erase it, but to keep it safe. Like a stone dropped in a stream. Heavy, but still. Sometimes, I still hear her voice. I remember the way she used to call me Mama Emma in the early days. The way she leaned on me like I was unshakable. And I remember the slow unraveling, the quiet rewrites of history, the soft exile disguised as healing. But more than that, I hear the sound of laughter at my table. I hear Dolores giggling over her lemon cookies. Harold humming while he fixes the broken drawer in my hallway. Rachel reading aloud from a book of poetry she thought she had forgotten how to love. I see sunlight pouring through clean windows. I feel the breeze drifting in through open doors. And most of all, I feel something I thought I'd lost for good dignity. Not pride, not power, but quiet. Steady dignity, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that sits with you at night and says, "You were always enough." If you're reading this and you've ever felt erased, if you've ever felt invisible in the middle of your own life, if someone made you feel like your value expired with age or silence, let me tell you something. You're still here. You matter, and you have every right to take up space in this world. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, pass it on, because someone else out there might need to hear. You don't have to ask for permission to belong. You already do.